Thank you, Dale. So today I'm going to give a talk that's a bit different from the normal work that we do at Digital Bond Labs, and it's a talk about DNS, both as it relates to manufacturers and as it relates to industrial systems in deployment. So really, there will be two parts to this talk. One will be talking about DNS and domain squatting and some neat stuff that we found publicly exposed on the internet from that. And then the second part of this talk will be DNS more related to industrial control system deployments. So first, for people that don't know, I know a lot of people here are ICS experts, but they may not be DNS experts. DNS stands for the domain name system. It's what's responsible for taking a host name, like our host name, digitalbond.com, and turning it into an IP address so that your computer can figure out how to connect to our website. There are a lot of different types of name server records that DNS servers hold in them. One of them would be an actual name server record, so that you know what server to query for Digital Bond's names. So another one would be a mail exchange record, so that your email client or email server knows how to send email to somebody when you're typing up an email. A records are these actual host records for IPv4 addresses. There are also some other types of records that we won't be talking about today. But some more terminology are terms related to squatting. There are a lot of different types of squatters that will sit on names similar to yours if you work for a company. There are a lot of people like to register, typo squats that are similar to your company name, but might have some characters transposed or mistyped or omitted or inserted. Back in the day, you used to have to actually go to google.com to search for search terms. Nowadays, browsers have integrated search, but back in the day, you would actually have to visit google.com, and a very popular thing would be somebody would accidentally type Google with 3 O's or something, and they would be presented with some website that was not actually owned by Google. There are some other types of squatting as well. One of the more common ones for phishing attacks are these homoglyphs, where you would take, for example, the letter O and replace it with a 0, and then if you send some kind of phishing email, you make the URL all capital letters, so it's a bit harder to tell that the link might be malicious. And then there's a whole other range of issues known as bit squatting, where your computer may not have error-correcting memory, so a bit may flip in your computer or in some upstream DNS server. So you would actually be on your computer typing the name correctly, but a bit error occurs, and you accidentally resolve the wrong host. So bit squatting, it's an interesting topic in its own. I definitely recommend, and this is kind of where I got the inspiration for this research project. There were two really good talks at DEF CON over the last few years. I first heard of the term at DEF CON 19. A gentleman named Artem Dynaberg gave a great talk on bit squatting. He attacked Facebook using some Facebook content distribution network names. He was able to get a lot of visitors around the world. And then this freshman at a university named Luke Young followed up on that research at DEF CON 23 by even going so far as to get SSL certificates for bit squat domains, and he could trick people into establishing SSL connections to him. It's kind of interesting stuff. I think that bit squatting is probably more relevant for those big content distribution networks than for vendors and operators, but still something worth paying attention to. So why do people squat on domains? So big motivations for this are phishing. If you know Eric Byers, he just showed me a nice phishing attack that he got that was a very similar name to his bank, where somebody was trying to get him to enter his banking details. That's a really common reason that people register squat domains. A lot of the domains that we looked at just had advertisements on them. It was, you're trying to visit Siemens. How about you click these links to buy some industrial equipment, and we'll get some commission from you following our link. A few of the sites that we looked at actually tried to get you to install malware or to do some other malicious activity, and then some of these guys are probably just out to make a buck. We're just going to hold the domain and see if the real owner of the trademark comes and offers us a few thousand euro for the name. So we did a survey of industrial manufacturers, and there are a few European names on this list, notably Siemens, Schneider Electric, Areva, and ABB. We tried to look at a few manufacturers from different regions in the world and look at who was squatting on their similarly named domains and what those squatters were trying to do. So we looked at those 11 manufacturers, and there were in total 433 squat domains. And we have to kind of exclude some of those from our final results because, for example, ABB has a 3-letter domain name. I think almost all of the 3-letter and 4-letter DNS names are registered. So there are a lot of legitimate companies with domain names similar to abb.com that are in this list that probably shouldn't be, but we'll actually prune them out in the results as we go. Just kind of interesting to see, how similar, what types of names people are going after that are similar to the actual industrial manufacturers. The big ones were, replacing a character, inserting a character, and bit squatting, believe it or not, on these domain names. They make up the majority of the malicious domains. So first off, one thing that popped out at me right away were a lot of these domains had mail exchange records, and nobody had really looked at mail exchange records that could potentially be malicious before, so it was something we decided to spend some time on. 195 of those domains actually have mail servers associated with them, and a lot of them belong to this company. I think it was like Post Host. I think that was a mail registrar or a mail handler based in Hong Kong, actually. So what we did was we set up a special mail server and we started sending emails to these 195 domains. Most of the email bounced. We sent emails to 2 different addresses at each of the domains. We sent one to Joe Engineer, and then we sent one to Zatoichi, since we were doing this blind testing. If you're familiar with Zatoichi, he's a Japanese blind swordsman, so kind of figured it was appropriate. The 22 or I should say 173 of those servers send us reject messages to both of those email addresses. 22 of them didn't send us a bounce message. So whether or not they truly accepted the email, we don't know. But we do know one of them at least did, because one of the domains actually, a few months later, we got a phishing email sent to the source address from this email that we had sent to this malicious domain. It wasn't a targeted phish. It was a really lame, hey, we shipped your package. Please open the PDF for the invoice, and of course it's like filename.pdf.exe, and if you upload it to VirusTotal, it's a pretty well-known remote access Trojan. So in this example, the one domain that actually accepted email was this Siemens.com domain, and I capitalized it on purpose because it's Slemons.com actually, but if you keep the lowercase l, it looks very similar to Siemens. So we sent those emails to Joe Engineer and Zatoichi at Slemons.com, and then we sent that from a custom source address, and then later on got phished at that custom source address. This website, the Slemons.com website, was previously actually hosting a new piece of in-the-wild malware on the website. Now the domain has changed a bit. It still has the same owner, but it just shows you a basic advertising page. If you feel like visiting this web page, I do recommend doing it from a virtual machine or something, though. The domain owner hasn't changed since we first looked at it. I think we first looked at it in September of 2015. The owner of it hasn't changed. It's still a private owner from using the registrar fabulous.com, but just the nature of the site has changed. Looking a little bit more at those 11 manufacturers, right? So we have, one piece of data about mail records. We decided to also look at the web servers. We wanted to limit our searching a little bit, so we limited it to www.thedomain.com. We found 254 of those squat domains actually had live hosts. The details are broken out here. The advertising and for sale pages weren't very interesting to me. The redirect pages, there were 28 of those web servers were doing some fishy things where they would redirect you to a third-party site. Where they redirected you changed every day, sometimes every load, but they weren't trying to do anything malicious. 10 of the hosts were quite interesting that they were actually hosting malware downloads. So they would try to say, hey, you need an Adobe Flash update, download this file and run this updater on your computer. They were kind of interesting because all 10 of those sites were doing similar things. They were targeting the download based on the user agent string. If you're not familiar, your web browser, when it requests a web page, says what version of browser it is. So it tells the server, what browser you're running and what operating system you're running. So if you change the user agent string between Windows, Mac OS, Linux, the web server would display a different download. It really only targeted Windows and OS X. If you used a Linux browser, it would give you the Windows download, which probably wouldn't work. But a lot of these sites ended up using a redirection network as well, where they would bounce you through a few different pages until you landed on this download page. Those 10 hosts hosting the malware would also use a tracking cookie. So if you visited the page twice, you would land on this domain is for sale, advertise here page. You would have to clear the tracking cookie in order to get a different malware download. I guess they use that through their whole redirection network to figure out, whether they should present you with the malware download or if you've already received it. Probably to throw off, who knows, malware researchers. Not that it would work very well. We did find one piece of new malware for OS X during the research, and that was, I think that one actually came from the slemons.com domain. So that's the 10 hosts that were hosting direct malware downloads. There were 10 other hosts that were hosting these kind of what I call a rat pre-installer. What they would do was pop up an error message saying, you've probably seen this before, your computer is infected, please call this 800 number, and an operator, Microsoft tech support, quote unquote, will walk you through cleaning your computer. Of course, if you call the number, they will direct you to download some piece of software that allows them to remotely operate your computer, where they then install adware, spyware, whatever. 2 of those squat domains were hosting pornography. That's all I'll have to say about that. And then 2 of the hosts were doing a legitimate redirect to the actual company. I think that number might be up to 3 or 4 now, but there weren't very many that were, there weren't very many manufacturers out there that were going out and grabbing the squat domains and pointing them to their actual website. And then the rest of these were, just under construction, or they had some legitimate business interest. So this is an example of one of the sites that's hosting, one of these tech support remote access Trojan installers. This is the seamsins.com domain. This error message that it displays just says, hey, call this tech support number. Again, if you call it, you'll probably be directed to some call center where a person tells you to install the malicious software. Again, with the seamsins.com domain, this is a prompt to install a browser plugin to anonymize your browsing. Of course, it's actually an adware plugin that will, display advertisements and pop-ups in your browser as you browse. And then this is another seamsins.com redirect that says, hey, it's clear from this that the squatter knows they're sitting on a Siemens typo squat. That they're saying, hey, you're trying to visit the Siemens website, download this program and you could get some cash. I don't think many people would fall for this, but it's there. And again, this is kind of interesting because I grabbed this seamsins.com info just a few days ago to update it, and it does depend on what day you load it. I think yesterday I looked at this again, and it was just showing an advertising kind of for sale page, not actually giving you any of these malware redirects. So whether it works today, I don't know. So a little bit more on that malware hosting. All the malware that we found was either adware or spyware. There wasn't any ICS target involved that we could tell yet anyway. The new piece of OS X malware that we retrieved, this was back in October of 2015. We uploaded it to VirusTotal. None of the antivirus recognized it. And then a few weeks later, some VirusTotal user grabbed it and analyzed it and said, hey, this is actually some spyware for Mac OS X that nobody's seen before. Now more antivirus vendors recognize it. Still not a lot, though. A prediction that I have is that somebody's going to get nasty someday with this, and they're going to clone a legitimate website and try to do something really evil. This already sort of happened to Schneider Electric, and I don't want to say it was something super evil that happened, but there was a schneiderelectric.com that was registered. It was owned by an individual in Shenzhen, China, and it hosted a Chinese language Schneider Electric website. And you'll actually notice, you might be able to see it in the back, but the logo even on the page says Schneider Electric without the R. The website was, this was back in September, October 2015. The website was displaying this picture. You can still go to archive.org and see this old version of the website. It was just hosting information on Schneider Electric's circuit breakers and motorized drives. It wasn't hosting anything that looked obviously malicious, but it was there. The cool thing is, I guess Schneider Electric probably approached the owner and offered him some cash, because now the website is owned by the legitimate Schneider Electric. It's registered to the folks in France, and it actually redirects to Schneider's real website. So go Schneider. So some limitations on all this research is, we can't really know who or why, right? Most of the domains that are registered are done through those, they have whois privacy turned on, so you can't find out who the real owner is. And again, if you load one of these pages 5 times, you'll get 5 different redirections and 5 different pieces of malware. You can probably do this all day. They use these weird networks of redirections to give you something different each time. And again, what malware they forward you to depends upon what user agent your web browser reports. They could even go so far as to look at something like the refer URL. If you click a link in a web browser, your browser will send who told you to click the link, what page you clicked the link from. You can target things in a web application based on that. You could even, have a web server that said, what's the country of origin of the IP address, and serve up different software based on that. And you can do this kind of deep linking attack too. Siemens has a pretty famous support website where they publish, various software downloads at support.industry.siemens.com. Most of the domains that are registered, they do what's called wildcard DNS. So the siemensins.com domain, that name server will resolve any domain in the siemensins.com domain. So if you look up support.industry.siemensins.com, it will give you a web page. And they could obviously set up some kind of deep link on that web page where if there's a path to a software update or firmware update, they just host a file there. It would make it a bit more difficult to figure out, what the website was doing. Legally, it can be pretty hard to clean up from a squatter if people are registering domains similar to yours. You have to prove that there is some kind of trademark violation or that there's some harm to your brand. The legal options take a long time. We have talked to a lot of vendors that have these squat domains, and there's not a lot they can do, right? They talk to their lawyers usually. Of course, talking to lawyers costs a lot of money. They often, they try to make some progress with the local country's certs, but the progress is usually quite slow. If you're lucky enough that the owner of the domain is like the person in mainland China, where they actually leave the whois data attached to their domain, maybe you can contact them and offer them some money. They would probably be pretty happy to take a few €1,000 for a squat domain, but there's that. I think if you want to be proactive about this as a company, if you're a big vendor, you probably have some extra money. I think registering all the domains that you can is the best proactive idea, right? It might cost you a few €1,000 per year to register all these squat domains, depending on the length of your name, but it would provide you some insurance for the future. So there's a couple of cool tools to look at for DNS. There's one tool called DNS Twist. I don't remember the gentleman's name that wrote this, but it's just a Python script that builds up a list of all the possible squats for your domain, figures out which of them are actively registered, and then gives you this summary. It even prints out what domains have mail exchange records. Another tool, which we haven't published yet, but I will, it's just a web scraper that will scrape your website and look for links to typoed domains. So you could use this to just crawl your website, see if you accidentally made a typo mistake in a link on your own website that might link to one of these domains. If you want to do some more research in this area, this is kind of a free research idea. Maybe we'll do it. A lot of these sites, they advertise that, hey, you can advertise on this site. Might be kind of interesting to buy some of that advertising time just to see how many people are visiting the typoed domain and where they're visiting from. It could give you a good idea for what domains are good to try to buy, maybe. So there's that. Now let's change topics a little bit and talk about DNS in deployment for industrial control systems. So there are kind of two sub-areas to this topic. One is DNS servers that we still see a lot of them that are misconfigured and that leak a lot of information about your network. And then a second one that we see way too often on ICS networks are DNS servers that allow data exfiltration from the ICS network. So let's dive in. First off is that kind of external information leak about your network. DNS has this funny record type called the zone transfer record. And if you ask a DNS server very nicely for its zone file, some DNS servers are misconfigured and they'll actually return a list of all of the hosts on your network. So in 2014, we kind of blindly coordinated with Dow Chemical. They're a small company. You might have heard of them. We looked at their DNS server from the internet and tried to do a zone transfer against their DNS server. This has been fixed, so I'm not saying anything horrible. But they leaked 50,000 IP addresses, most of which were on their internal network. So we could tell quite a bit about their network from analyzing those host names. There are hosts with GW in their name for gateway, NS in their name for name server. You can find quite a bit of information, figure out how their field sites are laid out. DNS zone transfer is one of those issues that I think has been pretty well known about since the 90s, but for some reason people still leave it enabled. So, again, it's just kind of interesting to see, a company's internal network IP addressing. There's not a lot that you want to do with this information unless you're on a paid engagement. But if you find a DNS server that has zone transfer enabled, can be fun to look at. So in the Dow example, was just kind of some interesting stats. We did the zone transfer. There were almost 51,000 hosts on their network. They're a publicly traded company, so you can know how many employees they have. They had about 51,000 employees at the time. So it's kind of an interesting metric. This graph just shows, what their IP addressing structure inside looked like at the time. An interesting research project to check out as far as DNS zone transfer is concerned is this Rob Fuller project. He runs this website called Deep Magic where he scours DNS servers on the internet constantly and just pulls down their zone files. His website, it's up and down as far as what you can search for because the database is huge. But I think he has a GoFundMe project, and if you pay him and ship him a hard drive, I think he still does this, where he'll actually put all of the DNS servers that he's found that have this enabled, and he'll put them on the hard drive for you and ship them back so you can run your own analysis. Next up, we have this DNS for data exfiltration. So this is one of these cool things for ICS networks because ICS networks, as we all know, are air-gapped, right? But people like to think they are anyway. People try to isolate them as best they can, but one of the strange things we see all the time is people allow DNS lookups from on their ICS network. It can be really useful for attackers. So, if you're on your ICS network and you try to look up an internet host name, for example, mail.google.com or www.google.com, the host that you're on your control network is first asking the control network DNS server, hey, what's the IP address for this thing? Assuming it's not cached, your local DNS server is then going to reach out to the internet to find an answer. And the way that works is, usually you'll ask first your local DNS server. Your local DNS server will then ask your corporate DNS server. Your corporate DNS server will then reach out to the internet and ask Google's DNS server, what's the IP address? So you're actually sending this request with data inside of it, data that you can control if you've compromised that system. For example, the request mail, and you're sending that request to a server out on the internet, and then in this case, Google is controlling the response data, which is an IP address and some other information, and sending it back to you. The cool thing is, if you're an attacker, is you can run a special DNS server that's meant for bidirectional communication. We own a few domains that we use for this purpose for pen tests and whatnot. But we usually run what's called an IP over DNS tunnel. So we can actually tunnel from the control system out to the internet and surf the web and download our own tools and whatever it is that we need to get. If you're of a certain mindset, you can use this for free internet access from 3G carriers sometimes. If you have a prepaid SIM card that's expired, a lot of times they still allow you to do DNS lookups, and sure enough, this technique will work. Not that I advocate doing it. You can also use it for getting like in-flight Wi-Fi if you're of that mindset, although I don't recommend it. Again, you're probably violating the law depending on where you live. So this is just an example of what the tunneling looks like. You probably can't read it in the back, but you're sending these queries for basically garbage domain names, and you're getting response back that contains garbage. And of course, the way that works is you're sending this garbage to your own DNS server and then getting this garbage back from your DNS server, and it could be encrypted data or whatever. So tools to look at for this, the IP over DNS tunneler that most people use is called Iodine. It doesn't do any data encryption, but it does do pretty good authentication. There's also a tool called DNSCat2 that's basically the Swiss Army knife. It's like Netcat in a way, where it just sends whatever data you want, no particular encoding. And in fact, Metasploit has a couple of DNS tunneling tools. They have like a DNS reverse shell, and even their interpreter can use DNS to reach back to you. A challenge in fixing this is that, well, it can be a challenge depending on who you are, but if you want to solve the challenge, I'd say the best bet is to just block DNS entirely from your control systems network. You probably don't need it. If you really do need it for some strange reason, configure your local industrial DNS server to only forward requests for your company's domain to the corporate DNS server. Because then that will eliminate the attack, or at least make it a lot harder. The attacker then has to own your DNS server, and hopefully you'll catch them. And then there are a couple of IDS rules. I think that there is a snort kind of, there's even a snort iodine rule, I think, for detecting that and for looking for suspicious DNS traffic. There's probably some opportunity there to develop better tools. And this is just an example of configuring your industrial control system's DNS server to forward requests for your corporate domain and reject everything else. So I know that was a lot of information and basically 3 talks in one. Are there any questions?
Okay, so we have time for a couple of questions. Any questions in the audience?
Hi, Lucian Constantin, IDG News Service. I have 2 questions. Have you seen this in an ICS environment in the wild, like malware using DNS to exfiltrate data? And the second part of this question is, how often did you manage to do this in your penetration tests?
I didn't catch the second question.
How often
Yeah.
are you able to do this in your own penetration tests when you are investigating the security?
So the first question, I have never seen it in the wild, but I don't do incident response as a rule. Well, I should say we have done incident response when we've encountered malware on a customer system, but I've never seen anybody doing DNS as an exfiltration technique. I will say that in the testing we've done of people's ICS networks, I don't know that I have numbers that I can share about that, but I will say that it's common enough. I thought mentioning it publicly would be a good idea. There are a lot of ICS, I will say, that allow the technique to work. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He usually lights up when he sees it, when we're out on an assessment and he sees they allow DNS out. He gets a big smile on his face. But good news is, would you say that it's pretty easy to fix, right, as you described?
Right.
So it's usually something that can be fixed sometimes that very day. So it's a quick win.